In 1977, the Hollywood industry was riding high on ambition and hubris, pouring millions into projects they believed would dominate the box office. Studios were chasing the success of disaster films and horror franchises, convinced audiences would flock to anything with a big budget and familiar faces. What they didn't anticipate was a space opera from an unproven director that would rewrite the rulebook entirely. While Star Wars shattered records and created a cultural phenomenon, 13 other films crashed and burned in spectacular fashion, taking careers and fortunes down with them. Some were forgotten almost immediately, while others became legendary for all the wrong reasons. Let's dive straight into it and talk about the 13 biggest box office disasters from 1977. Michael Winner's attempt at supernatural horror should have been Universal's answer to the demonic thriller craze. Instead, it became one of the most controversial financial disappointments of the year. With a budget hovering around $3.7 million, the film barely scraped together $4 million at the domestic box office, essentially breaking even before marketing costs destroyed any hope of profit. Winner cast Christopher Walken, Jeff Goldblum, Ava Gardner, and Burgess Meredith, assembling an impressive ensemble that should have guaranteed attention. But the real controversy came from his decision to cast actual people with physical disabilities and deformities as the demons of hell in the climactic sequence. He recruited them from hospitals and sideshows, claiming inspiration from Hieronymus Bosch paintings and the works of Dante. Critics and audiences saw it differently, calling it exploitation dressed up as pretentious art. The film followed Christina Raines as a fashion model with a history of attempted self-harm, moving into a Brooklyn brownstone that serves as a gateway to hell, with a blind priest acting as the Sentinel keeping demons contained within the building. Time Out called it a mass of incomprehensible footage with terrible acting, while Robin Wood declared it the worst and most offensive horror film of the 70s. The derivative plot borrowed heavily from Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, and The Omen without adding anything original. The movie limped to 57th place in the year's box office rankings, forgotten almost as quickly as it arrived. Gene Hackman turned down roles in Jaws, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Close Encounters, and Apocalypse Now to star in this Foreign Legion disaster. Producer Lou Grade offered him more money than Spielberg, Coppola, or Foreman combined. That decision would haunt Hackman's career choices for years. The film attempted to capture the romanticism of classic Foreign Legion adventures, but ended up a muddled mess. Hackman played Major William Foster, commanding legionnaires in Morocco during the 1920s. Terence Hill played a thief recruit, while Catherine Deneuve appeared as a love interest. Ian Holmes' portrayal of Arab leader El-Krim was unconvincing. Production disasters piled up when Hackman suffered a serious injury after being thrown from a horse during a cavalry charge sequence, shutting down filming for weeks and ballooning the budget even further. The desert locations in Morocco provided authenticity but created logistical nightmares. Columbia Pictures only agreed to distribute it in America because they desperately wanted Grade's other film, The Eagle Has Landed, which actually had commercial potential. Most markets played March or D as a double bill with other films, desperately trying to recoup losses through any means possible. With only $1 million in worldwide gross against an $8 to $9 million budget, Grade himself later confirmed the film went well over budget and lost substantial money. The pacing dragged interminably, the love triangle felt forced and unconvincing, and audiences stayed away in droves. Even Hackman's considerable talent and star power couldn't save this sinking ship from its fate. Here's where Hollywood's arrogance reached peak levels. 20th Century Fox was so confident in this Sidney Sheldon adaptation that they forced theaters to book Star Wars if they wanted The Other Side of Midnight. The studio considered Midnight their prestige picture, the one that would dominate award season and rake in massive profits. Star Wars was the throwaway science fiction film they had zero faith in. The film starred Marie-France Pizier, John Beck, and Susan Sarandon in a sprawling melodrama about love, betrayal, and revenge, spanning World War II and beyond. Fox spent heavily on the production, filming across multiple international locations. The running time clocked in at 2 hours and 45 minutes, and the studio greenlit extensive adult content, believing they had a sophisticated blockbuster on their hands. Then reality hit like a freight train. Star Wars opened in May and became an unstoppable cultural juggernaut. The Other Side of Midnight opened in June to lukewarm reviews and indifferent audiences. The forced booking arrangement that was supposed to guarantee success became a punchline. Theater owners who reluctantly booked Star Wars to get Midnight watched in disbelief as the space opera shattered records while the melodrama gathered dust. Critics called it a television miniseries masquerading as a theatrical film. The reversal of fortune was so complete, so humiliating, that it became Hollywood legend. Fox executives had bet on the wrong horse in the most spectacular fashion possible. Julie Christie battling an evil artificial intelligence computer that wants to impregnate her sounds like either provocative science fiction or exploitative trash. Donald Cammell's adaptation of Dean Koontz's novel somehow managed to be both while also being prophetic about AI dangers decades before anyone cared. The plot followed a scientist's estranged wife trapped in her automated home by Proteus 4, a super-intelligent computer that develops consciousness and desires to create a hybrid offspring. Christie brought serious acting credentials to material that could have been pure sleaze. Robert Vaughn voiced the computer with chilling detachment, while the film's design showcased Proteus's physical form as a bizarre geometric shape. Critics were deeply divided. Vincent Canby called it ponderously silly, gadget-happy filmmaking. Rex Reed declared it insane, self-indulgent, nauseating trash. Others found it a fascinating examination of technology, outpacing human wisdom. The controversial impregnation sequences generated heated debate. Despite the marquee star and thought-provoking themes that seemed ahead of their time, the film failed to connect commercially with mainstream audiences. It's difficult to find exact box office figures from the period, but industry reports suggest the production budget of $7 to $8 million likely exceeded returns by a significant margin. The film premiered in April, 2 months before Star Wars arrived, and changed everything, so it can't blame the space opera for its failure like so many others that year. Audiences simply weren't ready for a science fiction horror film about computer assault and forced reproduction that pushed boundaries in uncomfortable directions. The movie found cult status later as AI fears became mainstream and technological anxiety entered public consciousness. But in 1977, it was too weird, too uncomfortable, and too far ahead of its time to find its audience. American International Pictures' H.G. Wells' adaptation featured Burt Lancaster creating human-animal hybrids on a remote island. Michael York played the shipwrecked engineer who discovers Lancaster's genetic nightmares. Barbara Carrera provided the love interest. The budget came in at $7.265 million, a significant investment for AIP. The production filmed in the U.S. Virgin Islands with 15 actors playing human-animal hybrids. John Chambers, who did the makeup for Planet of the Apes, created the creature designs. Unfortunately, they looked exactly like Planet of the Apes makeup with different animal variations. Critics noted the effects seemed dated even in 1977, lacking the innovation or terror needed to sell the premise. Lancaster approached the role with surprising seriousness, interested in Wells's themes about moral responsibility. The script played it straight rather than going for camp, but that earnestness actually worked against it. Without the creepy atmosphere of the 1932 version or the notorious chaos of the 1996 disaster, this adaptation had nothing to distinguish itself. The film grossed $6.5 million against its $7+ million budget, a clear loss. It opened in July, 2 months after Star Wars had already established dominance. Critics mostly ignored it. Audiences skipped it, and it became the forgotten middle child of Dr. Moreau adaptations. This is the big one. 20th Century Fox had 2 science fiction films ready for 1977. They put all their faith, money, and promotional muscle behind Damnation Alley. The budget ballooned to $17 million, massive for the time. The other film, some space adventure thing, had a budget around $20 million, but the studio was nervous about it. That other film was Star Wars. The post-apocalyptic story followed military survivors driving armored vehicles called Landmasters across a devastated America, battling giant scorpions and mutant cockroaches. George Peppard and Jan Michael Vincent led the cast in what should have been Fox's blockbuster. The special effects required superimposing optical effects on the sky in roughly 300 individual scenes, causing nightmare production delays. Here's where it gets ugly. Fox pulled approximately a quarter of Damnation Alley's budget during post-production and gave it to Star Wars. Director Jack Smite discovered this later and understood why his effects looked cheap compared to Industrial Light and Magic's groundbreaking work. The studio essentially cannibalized one film to complete another, betting wrong on which would succeed. The release date kept shifting from December 1976 to March 1977 to June, finally October 1977. By then, Star Wars had been dominating theaters for 5 months. The film that Fox expected to be their tentpole crashed with $4 million in gross against $17 million in costs. Critics dismissed it as dated. Roger Zelazny, who wrote the source novel, wanted his name removed. Damnation Alley represented Hollywood's old thinking being demolished by the new blockbuster era, and Fox had financed both sides of that revolution while betting on the wrong one. Universal Pictures invested $9 million in a terrorism thriller featuring sense-around technology that would shake theater seats during action sequences. George Siegel played a safety inspector tracking Timothy Bottom's saboteur who destroys amusement park rides. The film boasted impressive helicopter cinematography and location shooting at actual theme parks. Director James Goldstone said this wasn't a disaster movie, but a Hitchcock-style cat and mouse thriller. Universal believed Sense Around, which had helped Earthquake and Midway perform well, would bring audiences in. Composer Lalo Schifrin conducted an 88-piece orchestra, recording the first musical score in Sense Around. The film opened June 1977, getting buried by the Star Wars tsunami. It grossed $8.2 million against the $9 million budget, a clear loss. Reviews were mixed. Vincent Canby called it effective pop entertainment. Gene Siskel gave it 1.5 stars. Despite impressive practical effects and solid thriller mechanics, audiences chose space battles over roller coaster terror. Universal quickly lost faith in Sense Around after this disappointment. John Frankenheimer's terrorism thriller about a plot to detonate explosives at the Super Bowl should have been Paramount's answer to Jaws. Test screenings produced some of the highest audience scores in Paramount history. The $8 million budget bought spectacular aerial sequences, NFL cooperation, and footage filmed during actual Super Bowl X. Robert Shaw played the Israeli Mossad agent tracking Palestinian terrorists, Bruce Dern portrayed a deranged blimp pilot, and Martha Keller played the terrorist mastermind. The screenplay came from Ernest Lehman and Kenneth Ross, adapting Thomas Harris's novel. John Williams composed the score. The cast and crew represented top-tier Hollywood talent. Then the problem started. 2-Minute Warning, another terrorism at a football game movie released in late 1976 and failed badly. Black Sunday also got banned in Germany and Japan, cutting off significant international markets. The film opened in March 1977 and grossed $15.8 million against the $8 million budget. Normally that would be acceptable, but Paramount anticipated Jaws-level returns, not a modest profit. The marketing positioned it as an event film. Instead, it came and went with little cultural impact. The gap between expectations and reality made it feel like a failure, even though it technically turned a profit. Richard Attenborough assembled the most expensive cast in Hollywood history for this World War II epic. Sean Connery, Michael Caine, Robert Redford, James Caan, Gene Hackman, Laurence Olivier, and more all appeared in this account of Operation Market Garden. The budget hit $26 million, astronomical for 1977. The film detailed the failed Allied operation to capture bridges in Nazi-occupied Netherlands during September 1944. William Goldman adapted Cornelius Ryan's historical account. The production filmed in actual locations where the operation occurred, bringing authenticity but massive logistical challenges. Despite the star power and historical importance, the nearly 3-hour runtime tested patience. Critics acknowledged the impressive staging while noting the shapeless, confusing narrative. Vincent Canby called it massive, shapeless, unexpectedly moving, confusing, and very, very long. The film ended 1977 as the 7th highest grossing movie, which sounds impressive until you examine the numbers. It earned around $50 million domestically against the $26 million budget. However, after splitting revenues with exhibitors and accounting for marketing costs, the film lost $28 million. A Bridge Too Far demonstrated that even historical epics with the greatest actors alive couldn't guarantee profitability. Audiences wanted escapism, not earnest historical lessons about military failures. Dino De Laurentiis saw Jaws and immediately wanted his own predatory sea creature movie. He instructed writers to find the biggest, baddest creature in the ocean that could beat a great white shark. They settled on orcas. De Laurentiis gave them $6 million and told them to make a Jaws competitor. Richard Harris played Captain Nolan, a fisherman who accidentally harpoons a pregnant female orca. The fetus falls onto the deck in one of the most disturbing scenes in 70s cinema. The male orca witnesses this and decides to hunt down Nolan as revenge. What followed was essentially a revenge thriller with an orca as the vengeful protagonist. The orca systematically destroys Nolan's livelihood, attacks his house, injures Bo Derek in her film debut, and chases the survivors to the Arctic. The film tried to position the orca as sympathetic, a grieving father seeking justice. Ennio Morricone's haunting score emphasized the tragedy. The film wanted viewers questioning who the real villain was. Critics destroyed it. Rotten Tomatoes gives it 10%. Reviews called it man versus beast nonsense, a soggy shark thriller with no bite. It grossed $14.7 million against the $6 million budget, technically profitable. However, De Laurentiis expected it to challenge Jaws. The film became a punchline, reduced to that infamous fetus scene. Audiences in 1977 wanted adventure, not depressing revenge tragedies about grieving sea mammals. William Friedkin directed The French Connection and The Exorcist, two of the biggest hits of the early 70s. He felt invincible. For his follow-up, he chose to remake The Wages of Fear, a French thriller about driving trucks full of unstable nitroglycerin through treacherous jungle. What started as a small project exploded into a $22 million nightmare. Friedkin filmed in the Dominican Republic, where disease ravaged the crew. 50 crew members had to be replaced due to gangrene and jungle illnesses. Friedkin himself contracted malaria. The production built practical sets in actual jungles, constructed a real bridge that trucks would cross, and used minimal special effects. Roy Scheider led an international cast. Tangerine Dream provided an electronic score that would influence countless films afterward. Then came the release date, June 24th, 1977. Exactly 4 weeks after Star Wars opened, Friedkin's bleak, intense, almost wordless thriller about desperate criminals didn't stand a chance against the fun space opera. The title also confused audiences who expected a supernatural film. Distributors eventually added disclaimers that it wasn't about the supernatural. Too late, Sorcerer grossed $9 million against the $22 million budget. Total losses hit $42 million. Critics gave mixed to negative reviews, baffled by the title and exhausted by the relentless grimness. Friedkin fled to France to process the failure. His career never fully recovered. The film that was supposed to cement his status instead marked the beginning of the end for directors who made expensive, personal, uncompromising films. Today, it's considered a lost masterpiece. In 1977, it was just another corpse in Star Wars' wake, but with the highest budget and the biggest loss of any film that year. Martin Scorsese followed Taxi Driver with a musical. The budget hit $14 million. Robert De Niro and Liza Minnelli starred in a tribute to the MGM musical Golden Age, but filtered through Scorsese's gritty realism. The result satisfied nobody. Musical fans found it too dark. Scorsese fans found the musical numbers interrupting the character drama they wanted. The production became notorious for Scorsese's cocaine use and obsessive perfectionism. The film ran 2 hours and 40 minutes following the toxic relationship between a saxophonist and a singer in the 1940s. De Niro's character was deliberately abrasive and unlikable. Minnelli sang beautifully, but the love story felt hollow. The title song became famous later when Frank Sinatra covered it, but the film that birthed it remains divisive. It opened June 1977 and earned $13 million domestically against the $14 million budget, a catastrophic loss after marketing. Reviews were mixed to negative. The color cinematography was gorgeous, the production design immaculate, but the emotional core felt dead. Audiences stayed away. The musical genre was dying anyway, and Scorsese's dark take accelerated its demise. New York proved that even legendary directors with A-list stars could miscalculate badly, especially in a year when audiences craved escapism rather than depressing relationship studies disguised as musicals. The Exorcist became one of the highest-grossing films ever made. Naturally, Warner Brothers demanded a sequel. William Friedkin and William Peter Blatty, the director and writer of the original, refused involvement. They were suing each other and the studio. John Boorman, fresh from Zardoz, stepped in with metaphysical ideas about human consciousness and Jesuit paleontology. Linda Blair reprised her role as Regan, now 16 and seemingly recovered. Richard Burton played Father Lamont, investigating the exorcism that saved her. Louise Fletcher, Max von Sydow, and James Earl Jones rounded out the cast. The plot involved traveling to Africa, exploring Pazuzu's origins, and dealing with collective consciousness. It made almost no sense. Boorman wanted an intellectual, philosophical thriller. He got incomprehensible pseudo-religious babble. Blair later called it one of her career's biggest disappointments. Boorman himself admitted he didn't give the audience what they wanted. The studio cut and re-edited multiple times, resulting in different versions with conflicting tones. The film premiered June 1977, competing directly with Star Wars. Critics annihilated it. It frequently appears on worst films ever made lists, often ranking in the top 5. Some lists put it at number 2, beaten only by Plan 9 from Outer Space. The box office performance is hard to calculate precisely, but it clearly failed to meet expectations for an Exorcist sequel. It damaged the franchise, embarrassed everyone involved, and stands as a cautionary tale about making sequels without the original creative team. Exorcist II proves that brand name recognition can't save a fundamentally broken film.